Everyone has seen the photographs. Three senior members of the British royal family, standing together on a balcony or walking side by side into a cathedral, smiling for the cameras. Queen Camilla in her tailored coat. Prince William, tall and serious, the future king. Princess Anne, upright and unsmiling in the way that has become her trademark. To the millions of people who watch these moments on television, they look like what they are supposed to look like, a family united doing their duty. But the smiles you see on the surface hide something far older and far more complicated. The relationships between these three people did not begin in front of the cameras. They began decades ago, long before William was born, in a tangle of romance, rivalry, heartbreak, and quiet resentment that most of the public has never fully understood. What connects Camilla to Princess Anne is not just marriage into the same family. What connects Camilla to Prince William is not just the fact that she married his father. Underneath the polite handshakes and the careful choreography of royal life, there is a history that took more than 50 years to soften, and in some corners, according to those who watch the family closely, it has never fully softened at all. This is the real story of how these three came to stand together, not the invented version, not the dramatic headline. The actual record of how a woman once called the most hated person in Britain slowly became the queen, and how the two people who had every reason to keep her at arm's length, the king's oldest son and the king's only sister, came to terms with her presence in their lives. Some of it is warm, some of it is uncomfortable, and a great deal of it is the kind of thing the public rarely gets to see. To understand where things stand today, you have to go back to the very beginning, to a time when none of these people held the titles they hold now. In the early 1970s, Camilla Shand was a young woman moving through the same small, privileged world as the royal family. She was witty, easygoing, and unbothered by the stiffness that ruled so much of aristocratic life. She had already met the young Prince Charles, and the two had struck up a friendship that would eventually turn into one of the most talked-about love stories of the century. But at that same moment, another royal romance was quietly unfolding nearby, one that most people have long forgotten, and one that would tie Camilla to Princess Anne in a way that neither woman could ever fully escape. The man at the center of it was Andrew Parker Bowles. Charming, handsome, and known in social circles as a great favorite among young women, he was an army officer with an easy confidence that drew people to him. And in 1970, around the same time Camilla's connection to Charles was taking shape, Andrew Parker Bowles was involved with Princess Anne, the Queen's only daughter. This is where the story becomes something stranger than a simple love triangle. It becomes, as one royal writer memorably put it, a kind of love rectangle involving the Queen's two oldest children and the two people who would go on to marry each other. Camilla was drifting toward Charles. Andrew was seeing Anne, and the threads between all four of them would knot together in ways that shaped the rest of their lives. For Princess Anne, the relationship with Andrew Parker Bowles was real, and by many accounts it mattered to her deeply. But it was never going to end in marriage. Andrew was a Catholic, and at the time, the rules that governed the royal family made it effectively impossible for a member of the family so close to the throne to marry a Catholic without enormous consequences. Anne, sharp and clear-eyed even as a young woman, would have understood this. She knew the limits of her own position, and so, whatever her feelings, the relationship was living on borrowed time. When it ended painfully. Andrew Parker Bowles broke things off, and not long after he announced that he was going to marry someone else. That someone else was Camilla. The two wed in 1973 in a marriage that would last more than 2 decades and produce 2 children. Try to picture the position this placed everyone in. The man Princess Anne had cared for had left her and married the woman who was, at the same time, quietly connected to Anne's own brother. From the very start, then, Camilla and Anne were bound together by an awkward, unspoken history. They had loved in different ways, two men whose lives were tangled with each other. And the wound of that early period, the sense that Camilla had ended up with the man Anne lost, is something several royal observers believe lingered in the background for a very long time. It is worth pausing here to be clear about what is known and what is guessed. Much of what has been written about Anne's private feelings comes from biographers and royal commentators rather than from Anne herself, who is famously guarded and has never spoken publicly about her early romance in any detail. What is documented is that Andrew Parker Bowles dated Anne, that he then married Camilla, and that all three remained inside the same tight social world for the rest of their lives. What is interpretation is the idea that this left a lasting bitterness. Both things are worth holding in mind, because the truth of this family is often quieter and more restrained than the dramatic versions suggest. What is certain is that the connection never fully went away. Even after everything, Andrew Parker Bowles remained a close and trusted figure to both women. Remarkably, he later became godfather to Anne's daughter, Zara. Think about what that means. The man who once dated the princess, then married the future queen, stayed so woven into Anne's life that he was entrusted with her child's christening. These are not people who cut ties cleanly. They are people who kept moving in the same rooms, attending the same weddings, sitting at the same tables, year after year, decade after decade, carrying their old history with them in silence. For years, this shared past sat beneath the surface of Anne and Camilla's relationship like a stone at the bottom of a still pond. On the outside, everything was calm and correct. Underneath, there was a weight that neither woman ever spoke about openly. Several people who have studied the family have described the early relationship between Anne and Camilla as cool, distant, even frosty. It was not open warfare. That is not how these two operate. Both Anne and Camilla are women who value discretion above almost everything, who were raised to keep their private feelings out of public view. But the distance was there, and those close to the family noticed it. While all of this was true for Anne, Camilla's larger story was moving in a very different and far more public direction. Her friendship with Prince Charles had never really ended, even through her marriage to Andrew Parker Bowles and Charles's eventual marriage to Lady Diana Spencer in 1981. What began as friendship became, over the years, one of the most scandalous affairs in modern royal history. And it is this affair, not the tangled romances of the 1970s, that would define how the wider world came to see Camilla for decades. To the public, and above all to Princess Diana, Camilla became the third person in a royal marriage. Diana famously spoke of her marriage as being crowded, a feeling that she was never the only woman in her husband's heart. She described Camilla in bitter terms, once reaching for the image of a certain fierce guard dog to capture how she saw her. In the eyes of much of the British public, Camilla was cast in the role of the villain, the woman who had come between the beloved Princess of Wales and her prince. When Charles and Diana's marriage collapsed publicly and painfully through the early 1990s, and when the details of the affair became national news, Camilla was blamed. She became, for a period, one of the most disliked women in the country. Then came 1997, and the death of Princess Diana in a car crash in Paris. The grief that swept across Britain was enormous, and much of the public anger that came with it landed on Camilla. In the years right after Diana's death, being associated with Charles's mistress was politically dangerous for the royal family. Camilla stayed largely out of sight. The palace moved carefully, slowly, trying to rebuild her image, and to prepare the country for the idea that she might one day be part of the family in an official way. It is against this backdrop, a woman blamed for a broken marriage, a woman connected by a painful old romance to the king's own sister, that we have to understand the two relationships at the heart of this story. Because there was one more person whose feelings mattered enormously and whose wounds ran deeper than anyone's. That person was the young son of Charles and Diana, the boy who would grow up to be the future king, Prince William. For William, Camilla was not simply his father's friend, or even his father's girlfriend. She was, in the eyes of a grieving boy who had just lost his mother in the most public and devastating way imaginable, the woman connected to everything that had gone wrong. To understand how difficult his relationship with Camilla would be, you have to remember how young he was and how raw the loss. William had watched his parents' marriage break apart. He had heard, as the whole world had, the accusations and the anger. And then his mother was gone, suddenly and forever. Those who have written about William's early feelings toward Camilla describe a boy who, understandably, could not warm to her. Some accounts say he could not stand her in those early years, seeing her as the person who had helped destroy his parents' marriage. This is not hard to believe. It would have been strange if he had felt anything else. Loyalty to Diana ran through both of her sons like a deep current, and welcoming the woman most associated with her unhappiness would have felt, to a teenage boy, like a betrayal of his mother's memory. According to his younger brother Harry, who wrote about these years in his memoir, the two boys carried their suspicions and their pain for a long time before the truth of the affair was fully confirmed to them. Harry described how his brother had long sensed the presence of another woman in their father's life, and how that awareness confused and troubled him. When the reality was finally clear, the guilt and the hurt only deepened. Whatever the exact details, the picture that emerges is of two young princes who did not welcome Camilla into their lives with open arms, but who instead had to slowly, painfully, come to accept a situation they had no power to change. William first met Camilla in the late 1990s, not long after his mother's death. By many accounts, Camilla herself was deeply nervous about that meeting. She understood exactly what she represented to these boys, and she knew that she was walking into one of the most delicate encounters of her life. One story that has been repeated many times describes how, after spending time with the young prince, she came away shaken, in need of a moment to steady herself. Whatever the truth of the small details, the larger truth is clear. This was never going to be easy for anyone involved. And yet, over the years that followed, something did begin to shift. Not quickly, not dramatically, but steadily. Camilla, by nearly every account, understood something crucial from the very beginning of her time in the boys' lives. She never tried to replace Diana. She never positioned herself as a mother. She kept a respectful distance, offering a steady presence rather than pushing herself forward. For a woman in her position, this restraint was perhaps the wisest thing she could have done. It gave William room, it did not force anything, and over a long stretch of years, that patience would matter. By the time Charles and Camilla were ready to marry, in 2005, both William and Harry had grown into young men. The wedding itself was a civil ceremony held at Windsor, and it marked the moment when Camilla officially became part of the family in a way that could no longer be treated as a secret or a scandal. Both sons attended, but according to Harry's later account, they had not been enthusiastic. He wrote that the two of them had actually urged their father not to go through with the marriage, not out of cruelty, but out of a complicated mix of loyalty to their mother and unease about what the marriage would mean. In their telling, they told their father they supported him and even accepted Camilla, but pleaded with him simply to be with her without marrying her. Their father chose his own path, as he had every right to do, and the marriage went ahead. So by the middle of the 2000s, the shape of these two difficult relationships was fully formed. On one side stood Princess Anne, connected to Camilla by an old and painful romantic history, keeping her at a cool distance. On the other side stood Prince William, connected to Camilla by the wreckage of his parents' marriage and the loss of his mother, slowly and reluctantly learning to accept her. And in the middle stood Camilla herself, no longer the mistress, now a wife, and eventually something none of them could have fully imagined in those early frosty years, a queen. What makes this story worth telling is not the drama of the beginnings. It is the long, slow, quiet distance that each of these relationships had to travel from those beginnings toward something else. Because both journeys, Anne's and William's, did move. They moved in different ways at different speeds and for different reasons. But they moved. And the way they moved reveals a great deal about who these three people really are when the cameras are turned off. Consider how much these people have in common with the ordinary families watching them. Almost everyone knows what it is to sit across a table from a relative connected to some old wound, to smile and pass the food and say nothing about the thing that everyone remembers. Almost everyone knows the strange experience of watching time slowly wear down an old resentment, until one day you realize the anger has quietly faded and something like acceptance has taken its place. The royal family lives all of this on an enormous public stage, with millions of people watching and commentators guessing at their every glance. But at the human level, the story is one that any family might recognize. There is one more thing worth understanding before going further, and it is perhaps the single most important key to this whole story. Both Princess Anne and Prince William are, by temperament, private and undemonstrative people. Anne has spent her entire life refusing to perform emotion for the public. She is known throughout Britain as the hardest-working member of the family, the one who turns up, does the job, and says the least. She does not gossip. She does not complain in public. Whatever she feels about Camilla, old bitterness, grudging respect, genuine warmth, or some mixture of all three, she has kept it locked behind that famously composed face for more than 50 years. William, in his own way, is similar. He is careful, controlled, and deeply guarded about his private feelings, especially when it comes to anything touching his mother's memory. He does not wear his heart on his sleeve. When he has feelings about Camilla, whether warm or cool, he tends to reveal them only through small actions and quiet decisions rather than open words. This means that almost everything the public thinks it knows about how these people truly feel is, in the end, a kind of educated guess pieced together from body language, from the occasional rare comment, from the reports of insiders, and from the actions that speak where words never do. That is exactly why so much of what gets written about this family turns out to be exaggeration. It is easy to look at two reserved royals standing stiffly beside Camilla and to read into it a great feud. It is just as easy to look at a warm, shared laugh and declare that all the old wounds have healed forever. The reality, as usual, sits somewhere quieter and more complicated in between. And the only honest way to tell this story is to follow the actual record, the documented events, the rare public statements, the real decisions, rather than the imagined drama. The record shows a remarkable transformation over the decades. It shows a woman who was once so unpopular that palace advisors feared she could never be accepted, slowly winning over the country, and more surprisingly, winning over the two people who had the most reason to resist her. It shows Princess Anne, who kept Camilla at a cool distance for years, eventually standing beside her and speaking words of genuine praise in front of the cameras. It shows Prince William, who could barely tolerate her as a boy, growing into a man who came to work alongside her as a fellow senior royal, especially in the hardest moments the family has faced. And it shows Camilla herself, patient and thick-skinned, absorbing decades of criticism and simply carrying on until the criticism finally began to fade. None of this happened by accident, and none of it happened overnight. Each shift was earned slowly, tested by events, and shaped by the enormous pressures of a family that must perform unity even when unity is hard. The moments that pushed these relationships forward were often moments of crisis and loss, deaths, illnesses, and the constant strain of public life. Grief, strangely, has a way of pulling people together. And this family has known a great deal of grief. In the years to come, the deaths of those closest to the family, the shock of serious illness striking more than one senior royal, the departure of Harry from royal life, and the slow passing of the older generation would all reshape the bonds between Anne, William, and Camilla in ways that no one could have predicted back in the frosty days of 2005. Some of those changes brought genuine warmth. Others simply brought a working truce, a professional respect between people who had learned to stand side by side for the good of the institution they all serve. That is the journey this story will follow, not a made-up war, not a fairy tale reconciliation, but the real, documented human path that three very different people walked over half a century, from a tangled beginning of romance and heartbreak and blame, toward the guarded, complicated, sometimes surprisingly warm relationships they hold today. It is a story about time, about duty, and about the quiet ways that even the deepest wounds can slowly change their shape. And it begins, as the next chapter will show, with the woman who had perhaps the longest and strangest history with Camilla of all, the king's own sister, the Princess Royal, and the slow thaw of a coolness that lasted the better part of 50 years. If there is one member of the royal family who has never needed anyone's approval, it is Princess Anne. For more than half a century, she has carried herself with a plainness that borders on defiance. She wears the same coats for decades. She turns up to more engagements each year than almost anyone else in the family. She has little patience for fuss, for flattery, or for the endless drama that swirls around the people she is related to. So when it comes to the question of how she truly felt about Camilla over the years, there is no easy answer written in interviews or confessions. Anne does not confess. She simply carries on, and that silence has made her one of the hardest people in the whole story to read. What can be said is that the early years, after Camilla married into the family in 2005, were not warm. Those who watched the two women closely in that period described the relationship in careful, cautious words. Reserved, correct, cool. There was no shouting, no scene, nothing that would ever make a headline on its own. But there was a distance, and everyone who knew the family could feel it. Two women who had known each other for decades, who had moved through the same rooms since the early 1970s, who shared a history that neither of them would ever discuss in public, were now bound together as sisters-in-law. And at the beginning, they kept their distance from one another with a kind of quiet, practiced discipline. There is a particular story from around the time of the wedding that has been repeated many times, and it is worth handling with care, because it sits somewhere between documented fact and royal legend. According to several reports, when Charles married Camilla in 2005, there was discussion within the family about matters of protocol, specifically about who would be required to show formal deference to whom. Some accounts claim that a document was drawn up, and that certain senior women in the family, and reportedly among them, would not be expected to curtsy to Camilla. The story has been told and retold, sometimes with confidence, sometimes with doubt. What matters is not the exact truth of the paperwork, which has never been fully confirmed, but what the story reveals about how people perceived the situation at the time. The very fact that such a tale could take hold and spread tells you how the public, and perhaps the family itself, understood the coolness between Anne and the woman who had just married her brother. For Anne, the reluctance would have been about more than the old romantic history. It was also, by the accounts of those who study the family, a question of watching and waiting. Anne is famous for her seriousness about duty. She measures people by their work, not their words. And when Camilla first joined the family in an official way, Anne appears to have taken a wait-and-see approach. She wanted to know what this new addition to the family would actually do. Would Camilla take the role seriously? Would she put in the hours? Would she prove herself useful to the institution Anne has devoted her whole life to serving? These were the questions that mattered to the Princess Royal, far more than any question of personal fondness. And here is where the story takes its most important turn, because Camilla answered those questions in the one way that Anne could not ignore. She worked. Over the years that followed her marriage, Camilla threw herself into royal duties with a steadiness that slowly earned respect. She took on causes and stuck with them. She supported literacy and reading, visiting schools, libraries, prisons, and workplaces to promote the cause year after year. She stood at Charles's side through every kind of occasion. She proved, through effort rather than charm, that she was willing to carry her share of the load. And for a woman like Anne, who values exactly that kind of quiet reliability above nearly everything else, this mattered enormously. Those who have written about the relationship describe the change as a gradual thaw. It did not happen in a single moment. There was no dramatic reconciliation, no tearful embrace, nothing that could be captured in a single photograph and labeled as the day everything changed. Instead, there was the slow accumulation of shared work, shared duties, and shared time. The two women appeared at more and more of the same engagements. They sat through the same long ceremonies, attended the same charity functions, endured the same tedious formalities that make up so much of royal life. And repeated closeness, over years, has a way of wearing down even the oldest distances. There was also, beneath everything, that strange bond of shared history that never entirely went away. Both women had a long connection to Andrew Parker Bowles, the man who had once dated Anne and then married Camilla. One royal expert observed that this shared past gave the two women something unusual in common, a great deal of history, and probably a great deal that they alone understood. They had known each other for so long, through so many chapters, that whatever coolness existed between them was built on a foundation of deep familiarity rather than distance. They were not strangers who disliked each other. They were two women who had circled each other for 50 years and knew, better than almost anyone, exactly where all the old bodies were buried. Then came the losses, and it was loss more than anything else that finally pulled Anne and Camilla close. In April of 2021, Prince Philip died. The Queen's husband of more than 70 years was gone, and the entire family was thrown into a period of grief and reflection. For Anne, who was extremely close to her father, this was a profound personal blow. But the death also had an effect that few outside the family would have predicted. According to one royal biographer, the warmth between Anne and Camilla noticeably increased after Philip's death. The reason was simple and human. In the face of the Queen's grief, the priority for everyone became the same: to be there for the aging monarch, to hold the family steady, and to protect the stability of the institution. The small, old differences that had kept Anne and Camilla apart suddenly seemed to matter far less than the shared task in front of them. When people stand together in mourning, focused on caring for someone they both love, the petty distances between them tend to fall away. That process only deepened the following year. In September of 2022, Queen Elizabeth II died, and Britain entered a period of national mourning unlike anything it had seen in generations. The family that gathered to bury her was a family under the eyes of the entire world, and in the images from that solemn week, one detail spoke volumes to those who knew the history. Anne and Camilla were seen sitting side by side. Two women who, decades earlier, had reportedly kept a careful, cool distance from one another, were now seated together through the most important funeral of their lives, united in grief and in duty. The private wounds of the past had been set aside for something larger. The death of the Queen also transformed the situation in a way that could easily have reopened old tensions rather than healing them. With Elizabeth gone, Charles became king and Camilla became queen. This meant that Camilla now outranked Anne. The woman Anne had once reportedly refused to defer to was now the most senior woman in the entire royal family, standing above the Princess Royal in the strict order of precedence that governs royal life. For a proud woman with Anne's long history, this could have been a bitter pill. One former royal reporter observed that the adjustment may have been genuinely tricky, not only for Anne, watching her sister-in-law rise above her, but for Camilla too, stepping into a role that placed her at the very top of a family she had once been an outsider within. But by this point, something real had shifted between them, and instead of resentment, what the public saw was respect. The clearest proof of this came not from gossip or from insiders, but from Anne's own mouth, a rare and precious thing, given how little she reveals. In 2023, as the country prepared for the coronation of King Charles, a documentary was made about the family and the transition to a new reign. In it, Princess Anne was asked about Camilla, and she gave an answer that surprised many people who remembered the old coolness. She spoke of having known Camilla for a long time, and then she offered genuine praise, saying that Camilla's understanding of her role and the difference it made to the king had been absolutely outstanding. She went further, acknowledging honestly that this was not a role Camilla would have been a natural fit for, a frank admission that spoke to Anne's characteristic bluntness, but adding that Camilla did it really well. She even noted the particular way Camilla brought a change of pace and tone to the king's public life. To understand how remarkable this was, you have to remember who was speaking. This was not a warm, effusive person given to lavish compliments. This was Princess Anne, the most reserved and hard-nosed member of the family, a woman who does not hand out praise casually and who has spent her life keeping her private feelings hidden. For Anne to speak this way, on camera for the record, was a genuine statement. It was the closest thing to an official seal of approval that anyone in Anne's position could give, and the fact that she framed it around Camilla's usefulness to the king, rather than around personal affection, made it all the more believable. Anne was praising exactly the thing she cared about most, the way Camilla supported and strengthened the man at the center of the family, and by extension the institution itself. The praise did not stop there. 2 years later, in the spring of 2025, Anne spoke about Camilla again, this time describing her as incredibly generous and understanding, and repeating her point that Camilla had made a real difference. Coming from Anne, these were strong words. They confirmed that the thaw of the previous years was not a one-time performance for a documentary camera, but a genuine and lasting shift in how the Princess Royal regarded her sister-in-law. There is a beautiful public moment that captures this new relationship better than any interview could. In November of 2024, the two women appeared together at a formal ceremony at the University of London. Anne, who serves as the Chancellor of the university, was there to present Camilla with an honorary doctorate of literature, an award recognizing Camilla's long support for reading and literacy. The image itself was striking. Anne, in her official academic role, formally honoring the sister-in-law she had once reportedly kept at a distance. It was a public gesture of respect from one senior royal to another. But it was a small, almost invisible moment during that same visit that revealed the most about who these two women are. As they arrived, Camilla, now the queen and therefore the higher ranking of the two, gestured for Anne to enter the room ahead of her. It was a gracious offer, a small breaking of the rigid rules of precedence as a mark of warmth toward her sister-in-law. And Anne, who knows royal protocol better than almost anyone alive, quietly declined. She smiled and she politely refused, allowing Camilla to enter first, exactly as tradition demanded. Think about how much that single exchange contains. Camilla, once the outsider, offering to bend the rules in Anne's honor. Anne, once the cool and distant sister-in-law, refusing the favor and insisting on giving Camilla the deference her new position required. It was a quiet dance of mutual respect, each woman honoring the other in her own way. The woman who reportedly once would not curtsy was now the one insisting on observing the proper order. Nothing could better illustrate how far the two of them had traveled from those frosty early years. Of course, no honest telling of this story would pretend that every trace of the old distance has vanished, or that the relationship is one of uncomplicated warmth. This is where it becomes important to separate the documented record from the constant churn of speculation that surrounds the family. Over the years, there have been reports and rumors suggesting that the coolness never fully disappeared, that beneath the polite surface Anne still keeps Camilla at arm's length, that the old wounds from the 1970s never truly closed. Some commentators have pointed to occasional moments, a greeting that seemed less warm than expected, a break from the usual protocol at a public service, and read into them signs of lingering tension. These reports deserve to be treated with caution rather than accepted as fact. They come largely from unnamed sources and from the interpretation of body language, which is a notoriously unreliable way to know what is truly in a person's heart. When a woman as guarded as Princess Anne moves through a public event, it is all too easy for observers to project drama onto her every gesture. A slightly stiff greeting from Anne might mean deep resentment, or it might simply mean that Anne, being Anne, was tired or focused, or behaving exactly as she does with everyone. The honest position is to acknowledge that these rumors exist, that some people who watch the family closely believe the relationship remains more complicated than the warm public moments suggest, while also recognizing that the actual evidence for ongoing hostility is thin, and that Anne's own recorded words point clearly in the opposite direction. What can be said with confidence is that Anne and Camilla today share what appears to be a stable, respectful, and often genuinely warm relationship, built not on shared personality. They are quite different women, but on shared values. Both of them believe in duty above self. Both of them are willing to do the unglamorous work of royal life without complaint. Both of them have devoted themselves to supporting the king, each in her own way, and each has come to respect the other's contribution. They maintain their own separate circles of friends and their own distinct styles. They are not inseparable companions, but they are, by every reliable measure, allies. Body language experts and long-time royal watchers have noted how at ease the two women now appear in each other's company. Where once there was stiffness, there is now an easy familiarity. They stand comfortably together. They share private jokes at public events. They move through ceremonies with the unspoken coordination of two people who have done this 1,000 times side by side. The transformation from the cool distance of 2005 to the comfortable partnership of today is one of the quiet success stories of the modern royal family, and it is all the more impressive for having been achieved by two of the least demonstrative people in it. Part of what makes this relationship work is that Anne and Camilla understand each other's positions in a way that few others can. They are both women who married into or lived within the intense scrutiny of royal life. They have both been judged harshly by the public and the press at various points. They have both learned to keep their private selves hidden and to present a composed face to the world. And they both know, from long and sometimes painful experience, exactly what the king needs from those around him. In that sense, they are natural partners in the most important task of all, holding the family and the monarchy steady through difficult times. There is also the simple fact of time. 50 years is a very long stretch of shared life. Whatever heartbreak or rivalry or resentment may have existed in the early 1970s, when a young Andrew Parker Bowles moved between the two of them, has been softened by half a century of proximity. The women who circled each other warily in their 20s are now in the later chapters of their lives, both having endured losses, both having buried people they loved, both having watched the family change around them again and again. At a certain age, and after so much shared history, old grievances tend to lose their power. What remains is a kind of hard-won understanding between two people who have simply known each other for too long to remain enemies. The relationship between Princess Anne and Queen Camilla, then, is not a fairy tale, and it is not a feud. It is something more real and more interesting than either of those simple stories. It is the tale of two proud, private women who began at a cool distance, shaped by an awkward tangle of old romance and public scandal, and who slowly, over decades, through shared work and shared grief, arrived at a place of genuine mutual respect. It took the death of a beloved father, the death of a mother and queen, and years of quiet effort to get there. But get there they did. And the proof is written not in gossip, but in Anne's own rare words of praise, and in the small, telling gestures of respect that pass between them when the cameras happen to be watching. Yet Anne's journey with Camilla, difficult as it was, may not have been the hardest of the two great reconciliations at the heart of this family. For all the old history between the two women, Anne was never carrying the specific, searing wound that Camilla represented to another member of the family. Anne's coolness came from a rivalry of the past. But there was someone else whose distance from Camilla came from something far more painful, from grief, from loss, and from the memory of a mother taken too soon. That person was the future king. And his long, complicated journey toward accepting the woman who married his father is a story all its own. Some wounds are made of rivalry, and time can wear them down. Other wounds are made of grief, and those are far harder to heal. Princess Anne's long coolness toward Camilla grew out of an old romantic history, a rivalry of the past that eventually softened into respect. But Prince William's difficulty with Camilla came from something deeper and far more painful. It came from the loss of his mother. And that is a wound that does not simply fade with the passing of years. It has to be worked through, slowly and carefully, and even then it leaves a mark that never fully disappears. To understand William's journey with Camilla, you have to hold on to one simple truth above all others. In William's eyes, especially in the beginning, Camilla was tied to the worst thing that ever happened to him. She was connected, in the mind of a grieving boy, to the breakdown of his parents' marriage and to the shadow that had hung over his childhood. And then his mother died, suddenly and publicly, when he was just 15 years old. For a boy carrying that kind of loss, warming to the woman most associated with his mother's unhappiness, was never going to be a simple matter of good manners. It was going to be one of the hardest emotional journeys of his life. The early years, by every account, were marked by real coldness. Those who have written about this period describe a young William who, understandably, could not stand Camilla. He saw her through the lens of loyalty to his mother, and through that lens she appeared as the woman who had helped destroy his parents' marriage. This was not a considered political judgment. It was the raw feeling of a boy who had lost the most important person in his world, and who needed someone to hold responsible for the pain. Camilla, fairly or unfairly, occupied that place in his heart for a long time. His younger brother later wrote about these years, describing the deep unease both boys felt about the woman who had entered their father's life. According to that account, the brothers had sensed the presence of another woman long before the truth was fully confirmed to them, and that awareness had troubled and confused the older brother in particular. When the reality of the affair became undeniable, the feelings of hurt and guilt only grew. Whatever the precise details of those private family moments, the larger picture is clear and deeply human. Two young princes, still grieving their mother, being asked to make room in their family for the very person they associated with her sorrow. And yet, even in those difficult early years, there were signs of the wisdom that would eventually make reconciliation possible, and much of that wisdom came from Camilla herself. When she first met the young William in the late 1990s, not long after Diana's death, Camilla was by many accounts extremely nervous. She understood, better than anyone, exactly what she represented to this boy. She knew she was walking into one of the most emotionally charged meetings imaginable. One often repeated story describes how, after spending time with the young prince, she came away rattled and in need of a moment to compose herself. Whatever the exact details, the nervousness itself tells you something important. Camilla did not approach William with arrogance or entitlement. She approached him with caution, with awareness, and with a clear understanding of how delicate the situation was. That understanding shaped everything that followed, and it may well have been the single most important reason the relationship eventually healed. Camilla, according to nearly every account, made a crucial choice early on. She never tried to be William's mother. She never attempted to step into the space that Diana had left. She never pushed herself forward as a replacement or forced a closeness that the boys were not ready to give. Instead, she kept a respectful distance, offering a steady and undemanding presence rather than an emotional claim. For a woman in her position, this restraint was perhaps the wisest possible course. It gave William room to breathe. It let him set the pace, and over many years, that patience created the space in which a real relationship could slowly grow. The marriage of Charles and Camilla in 2005 was a turning point, though not a comfortable one. By then, both William and Harry had grown into young men and both attended the wedding. But according to his brother's later account, they had not welcomed it. The brothers had reportedly urged their father not to marry, telling him they supported him and even accepted Camilla, but asking him simply to be with her without making it official. Their father chose his own path. And so the marriage went ahead, with the sons present but their feelings still tangled and unresolved. The wedding made Camilla an official part of the family, but it did not, by itself, heal anything. The healing would have to come later, through time and through events that no one could have predicted. The years that followed saw a slow and uneven warming. There were moments of genuine progress. Camilla played a supportive role around the time of William's own wedding to Catherine Middleton in 2011, and by many accounts she was visibly happy for the young couple. It is worth noting, though, that even this period was not without its complications. Some accounts from royal biographers suggest that Camilla had reservations in the early days of William and Catherine's relationship, with reports that she felt Catherine's background was not aristocratic enough for a future king. These reports come largely from biographers rather than from any confirmed statement, and they belong in the category of interpretation rather than established fact. But they are worth mentioning honestly, because they illustrate that the path was never perfectly smooth, and that the warming between William and Camilla happened in fits and starts rather than in a straight line. Then came a series of events in the 2020s that, more than anything before them, reshaped the relationship between William and his stepmother. And as with Anne, it was crisis and difficulty, rather than happy occasions, that did the most to bring them together. The first great shift came in 2020, when William's brother Harry stepped away from royal life and moved abroad with his family. This departure, painful as it was for the family, had an unexpected effect on William's relationship with Camilla. According to one source close to the situation, Harry's exit actually brought William and Camilla closer together. The reasons were partly practical and partly emotional. With Harry gone, and with the ongoing strain that his departure created, William and his wife had little appetite for additional drama or tension within the family. They wanted stability. They wanted the remaining senior members of the family to pull together rather than apart. And in that atmosphere, the old coldness between William and Camilla began to matter less than the shared need to keep the family functioning. The deeper transformation, however, came with illness. In early 2024, the family was struck by a wave of serious health crises that shook it to its core. The king himself revealed that he had been diagnosed with cancer. Not long after, William's own wife, the Princess of Wales, disclosed that she too had been diagnosed with cancer and was undergoing treatment. Suddenly, the family was facing all at once the possibility of losing people at its very center. The king was ill. The future queen was ill. And in the face of that shared fear and vulnerability, the small resentments of the past seemed almost meaningless. It was during this period that William and Camilla, by several accounts, came a long way. Sources describe their relationship in this time as having grown into something genuinely familial, a real and settled bond rather than a wary truce. Part of what drove this change was what William saw in Camilla during the king's illness. He watched her care for his father. He saw her devotion, her steadiness, and her willingness to look after the man at the center of the family through a frightening time. Camilla was reported to be looking after Charles closely, encouraging him to rest, to eat, to take care of himself even as he continued his duties and his treatment. And for William, watching this care unfold, something shifted. It is one thing to resent a woman for the pain of the past. It is another thing entirely to watch that same woman devote herself completely to your ailing father. According to one royal expert, the king's illness brought Camilla's devotion and dedication into sharp focus, and William could not help but appreciate it. There was also warmth extended in the other direction. During the difficult period of the Princess of Wales's illness, Camilla was reported to have offered to help in any way she could. The family that had once been divided by old wounds was now, in the face of real danger, drawing together to support one another. Illness and fear had done what years of ordinary duty could not. They had reminded everyone of what actually mattered, and they had pushed William and Camilla toward the kind of familial closeness that would have seemed impossible in the frosty early years. By this point, William had grown from the grieving boy who could not stand his stepmother into a man who worked alongside her as a fellow senior royal. The two came to share not just a family but a common purpose, the future of the monarchy and the well-being of the king. They developed what observers described as a warmer, more familial relationship, built on the hard experiences they had come through together. It was not the relationship of a son and a mother. It never could be, and neither of them ever pretended otherwise. But it had become something real and functional, and, in its own way, warm, a working partnership between two people who had learned to respect each other through difficult times. Of course, as with every part of this family's life, the reality was more complicated than any simple story of healing. Even as William and Camilla grew closer, there were moments that revealed the relationship was still, at times, a delicate one. One such moment came in 2024, when it emerged that William had made a business decision that affected Camilla's own family. As the head of the Duchy of Cornwall, the vast estate that funds the Prince of Wales, William removed Camilla's sister, Annabel Elliot, from the estate's payroll. Annabel had spent nearly 2 decades working as an interior designer connected to the family. The decision naturally sparked speculation. Was this a snub? Was it a sign of lingering tension between William and his stepmother's family? The honest answer, according to those who examined the decision, was that it was most likely a straightforward business move rather than an act of hostility. One royal commentator described it as an inevitable step, explaining that William simply wanted to build his own team as he took control of the estate and shaped it according to his own vision. Every leader who inherits an organization tends to bring in his own people, and William appears to have been doing exactly that. But the very fact that the decision could be read as a possible snub shows how carefully these relationships have to be managed, and how easily any action, however practical, can be interpreted through the lens of old tensions. This is where honesty about the difference between fact and speculation becomes especially important. In recent years, the press has produced a steady stream of reports suggesting various tensions surrounding William and Camilla, disagreements over family matters, competing interests, and the general friction that comes with a large family navigating enormous pressures. Many of these reports come from unnamed sources and should be treated with real caution. Some of them may contain grains of truth. Others are likely the ordinary exaggeration that surrounds a family watched this closely by the world. The responsible way to understand the William and Camilla relationship is to hold on to what is documented and reliable, while treating the endless churn of anonymous gossip as exactly that, gossip, interesting perhaps, but not to be mistaken for established fact. What is documented and reliable paints a clear enough picture. It shows a relationship that began in grief and coldness, that was shaped by the loss of a mother and the presence of a woman associated with that loss, and that slowly, unevenly, over more than 2 decades, warmed into something workable and often genuinely warm. It shows a stepmother who was wise enough never to overreach, who kept her distance and offered steady support rather than forcing intimacy. It shows a stepson who carried his pain for a long time, but who, as a grown man, was able to see and appreciate the devotion that woman showed to his father in his hour of need. And it shows a family that, tested by departure and by illness, chose again and again to pull together rather than apart. There is something quietly moving in this journey, precisely because it was so hard. Reconciliation that comes easily is not worth much. The reconciliation between William and Camilla was earned slowly and at great cost, through years of careful patience on her side and years of gradual softening on his. It required William to separate the woman in front of him from the symbol she had once represented in his grief. It required him to see Camilla not as the shadow over his childhood, but as the person actually caring for his sick father, day after day, without complaint. That is a difficult thing for anyone to do, and it is a mark of William's own growth as a man that he was able to do it. It is important to be honest, too, about the limits of this healing. William and Camilla are not close in the way that a son and a mother are close. They likely never will be, and there is no shame in that. The bond they have built is the bond of 2 adults who came to respect each other through shared hardship, not the bond of deep familial love that grows from childhood. William has reportedly been clear in his own way that Camilla occupies a specific place in his life, the wife of his father, rather than a maternal role. And that clarity is not coldness. It is honesty. It reflects a relationship that has found its true and appropriate shape, neither pretending to be more than it is nor remaining trapped in the resentments of the past. What makes the whole story so compelling is how ordinary it is at its human core, despite being played out on the grandest stage in the world. Countless people know what it is to struggle with a step-parent, to resent the person who entered a family in the wake of pain, and then slowly, over years, to arrive at a place of grudging acceptance or even genuine warmth. Countless people know what it is to have their feelings about a difficult relative transformed by a crisis, by the sight of that relative caring for someone they both love, by the great leveling force of illness and mortality. William's journey with Camilla, stripped of its crowns and its palaces, is a journey that any blended family might recognize. It is the journey of a wounded child growing into an understanding adult. And so, by the middle of the 2020s, both of the great reconciliations at the heart of this family had largely been achieved. Princess Anne, once cool and distant, had arrived at genuine respect for the sister-in-law she had circled for 50 years. Prince William, once unable to stand the woman he blamed for his mother's unhappiness, had grown into a man who worked alongside her and appreciated her care for his father. Two very different journeys, driven by two very different kinds of pain, had both bent slowly toward acceptance. And Camilla, the woman at the center of both stories, had through patience and steadiness and sheer endurance transformed herself from the most disliked woman in Britain into the queen, accepted, if not always adored, by the very people who once had the most reason to keep her out. But a story like this never truly ends, because these are living people, still moving through their roles, still tested by new pressures and new events. The united front they present today is real, but it is also something that must be maintained, protected, and constantly renewed against the endless speculation of a watching world. What actually holds these three people together now, in the present day, and how much of the old complexity still lingers beneath the surface, is the final piece of the picture, the part that separates the truth of who they are from the drama that others so often imagine.